My name is Emma, and I am 30 years old. As a forensic accountant, I am trained to remain calm under pressure, but nothing could have prepared me for what my parents left on my front porch. It was a beautifully wrapped package with a single typed warning taped to the top. Do not make a scene. I watched their taillights disappear into the dark before bringing it inside. When I lifted the lid, my breath caught in my throat and my knees nearly gave out. I reached for my phone and immediately dialed 911. Just minutes later, my husband walked through the front door. He took one look at the police officer standing in our living room, and his face lost all its color. "Please do not tell me they actually did it," he whispered. Before I continue this story, I would love to know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit subscribe and like this video to find out how a single cardboard box exposed the darkest secrets of my entire family. My daily life revolves around logic numbers and undeniable proof. I track missing assets, expose corporate fraud, and find the truth hiding behind manipulated spreadsheets. My brain is trained to remain objective and emotionally detached in high-stress situations. I never let panic dictate my actions, but absolutely nothing could have prepared me for the horrific delivery that arrived at my doorstep on a quiet Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing audit reports for a corporate client, when the aggressive sound of screeching tires shattered the calm silence of our suburban street. I stood up from my stool and moved quickly to the living room window. I pulled back the heavy fabric curtain just in time to see my parents' silver Mercedes accelerating recklessly down the road. My father Thomas was behind the wheel, his jaw clenched tight in concentration. My mother Patricia sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead into the night. They did not slow down at the stop sign at the end of the block. They just sped away like fugitives fleeing a crime scene. A heavy knot formed in my stomach. My parents never visited my house unannounced. In fact, they rarely visited me at all. They usually reserved all their energy, affection, and financial resources for my younger sister Brittany. At 28 years old, Brittany was their undisputed favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, my career in forensic accounting was regularly dismissed by them as cheap bookkeeping. I unlocked the deadbolt and stepped out onto the cold concrete porch. The night air was biting. There, resting perfectly centered on my welcome mat, was a rectangular box wrapped in expensive silver paper and tied with a thick white silk ribbon. Taped to the top was a small white index card with the words, "Do not make a scene," printed in stark black ink. I carried the heavy box inside, the strange weight of it making my hands tremble slightly. I set it down on the kitchen island right on top of my audit files. I pulled the silk ribbon, letting it fall to the floor, and carefully tore away the silver paper. I lifted the lid. The sharp smell of copper hit me instantly. Inside the box, resting on a bed of white tissue paper, was a soft cashmere scarf. It was heavily stained with dark, dried blood. My heart began to pound violently against my ribs like a trapped bird. Nestled right next to the ruined fabric was a piece of broken plastic and metal. I leaned in closer, my analytical mind trying to process the visual data before me. It was a shattered BMW hood emblem. I recognized it immediately because it belonged to my car. Just last week, Brittany had begged to borrow my sedan for a weekend getaway with her friends, claiming her own vehicle was in the shop. My parents had relentlessly pressured me into handing over the keys, insisting that I should be a supportive older sister. I stared at the bloodied scarf and the broken emblem, the terrifying reality of the situation rapidly crystallizing in my mind. There was one final item inside the box. A heavy piece of cardstock lay buried beneath the broken car part. I used the tip of my pen to slide it out, being careful not to touch the dried blood. The message was typed in the same sterile font as the warning on the outside. The note read, "Brittany had a little accident. The pedestrian stepped out. Your life is not going anywhere anyway, and you have no reputation to protect. Take the fall for her. Tell the police you were driving. We will wire $2 million to your offshore account by tomorrow morning. Do not make a fuss, or you will regret it." I read the words 3 times to ensure I was not hallucinating. My parents were asking me to confess to a violent crime to save their golden child. They were asking me to throw away my freedom, my clean record, and my future in exchange for blood money. They wanted to buy my life to cover up a hit and run. I felt a wave of physical sickness, but I did not break down. I did not fall to the floor and weep over their cruelty. The shock burned away, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. My forensic training took over completely. I did not touch the scarf or the broken emblem again. I stepped back from the kitchen island, pulled my cell phone from my pocket, and marched over to lock my front door. I dialed 911 and waited for the dispatcher to answer. "I need police assistance immediately right now at my home address," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I have just received a package containing physical evidence of a hit and run. Please hurry." My parents left a wrapped box on my front porch with a single typed warning that read, "Do not make a scene." When I opened it, my knees nearly gave out. Trembling, I dialed 911. Minutes later, my husband walked in. The moment he saw the two police officers standing in our living room, all the color drained from his face. "Please, do not tell me they actually did it," he blurted out. "My name is Emma, and I am 30 years old. As a forensic accountant, my entire life revolves around logic, tracking missing assets, and spotting the truth hiding behind manipulated spreadsheets. I am trained to remain completely objective in high-stress situations. But absolutely nothing could have prepared me for the horrific delivery that arrived at my doorstep on a quiet Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my kitchen island when screeching tires shattered the calm silence of our suburban street. I moved to the living room window just in time to see my parents' silver Mercedes accelerating recklessly down the road. My father Thomas was behind the wheel, his jaw clenched. My mother Patricia sat rigid in the passenger seat. They sped away like fugitives fleeing a crime scene. A heavy knot formed in my stomach. My parents never visited my house unannounced. They reserved all their energy and financial resources for my younger sister Brittany. At 28 years old, Brittany was their undisputed favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, my career was regularly dismissed by them as cheap bookkeeping. I unlocked the deadbolt and stepped out onto the cold concrete porch. The night air was biting. There, resting perfectly centered on my welcome mat, was a rectangular box wrapped in expensive silver paper and tied with a thick white silk ribbon. Taped to the top was a small white index card with the warning printed in stark black ink. I carried the heavy box inside, the strange weight of it making my hands tremble slightly. I set it down on the kitchen island, right on top of my audit files. I pulled the silk ribbon, letting it fall to the floor, and carefully tore away the silver paper. I lifted the lid. The sharp smell of copper hit me instantly. Inside the box, resting on a bed of white tissue paper, was a soft cashmere scarf. It was heavily stained with dark, dried blood. My heart began to pound violently against my ribs. Nestled right next to the ruined fabric was a piece of broken plastic and metal. I recognized it immediately because it belonged to my car. It was a shattered BMW hood emblem. Just last week, Brittany had begged to borrow my sedan for a weekend getaway with her friends, claiming her own vehicle was in the shop. My parents had relentlessly pressured me into handing over the keys, insisting that I should be a supportive older sister. I stared at the bloodied scarf and the broken emblem, the terrifying reality of the situation rapidly crystallizing in my mind. There was one final item inside the box. A heavy piece of cardstock lay buried beneath the broken car part. I used the tip of my pen to slide it out, being careful not to touch the dried blood. The note read, "Brittany had a little accident. The pedestrian stepped out. Your life is not going anywhere anyway, and you have no reputation to protect. Take the fall for her. Tell the police you were driving. We will wire $2 million to your offshore account by tomorrow morning. Do not make a fuss, or you will regret it." I read the words 3 times to ensure I was not hallucinating. My parents were asking me to confess to a violent crime to save their golden child. They were asking me to throw away my freedom, my clean record, and my future in exchange for blood money. They wanted to buy my life to cover up a hit and run. I felt a wave of physical sickness, but I did not break down. I did not fall to the floor and weep over their cruelty. The shock burned away, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. My forensic training took over completely. I did not touch the scarf or the broken emblem again. I stepped back from the kitchen island, pulled my cell phone from my pocket, and marched over to lock my front door. I dialed 911 and waited for the dispatcher to answer. "I need police assistance immediately right now at my home address," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I have just received a package containing physical evidence of a hit and run. Please hurry." The agonizing wait for the authorities lasted exactly 7 minutes. Two uniformed officers arrived and stood on my porch. They introduced themselves as Officer Ramirez and Officer Bennett. I stepped aside and motioned for them to enter. My voice remained entirely composed as I directed them straight toward the kitchen island. I simply pointed to the silver-wrapped box sitting next to my client audit files. I explained exactly what was inside, detailing the blood-stained cashmere scarf, the broken piece of the BMW emblem, and the typed extortion note. Officer Ramirez pulled a pair of blue latex gloves from his pocket and leaned over the box. His expression hardened the moment he read the typed card. He instructed Officer Bennett to secure the perimeter and call for a crime scene tech. The air in my kitchen grew thick with tension. This was no longer a twisted family dispute. This was an active criminal investigation. Just as Officer Bennett returned from checking the perimeter of the property, the sharp, aggressive sound of a car engine roaring up the driveway shattered the quiet tension in the house. A car door slammed with tremendous force. Frantic footsteps pounded up the walkway. A key scraped against the lock, and the front door burst open. It was my husband, Liam. He rushed into the foyer, his chest heaving, his tailored suit jacket wrinkled, and his tie askew. He looked wild, breathless, and fully prepared to play the role of the comforting husband rushing home to a hysterical wife. He expected to find me sobbing on the floor. He expected to find me broken and terrified by my parents' demands. Instead, he found me standing completely motionless next to two armed police officers. The sudden sight of the uniforms hit Liam like a physical blow. The artificial concern vanished from his face, replaced by pure terror. The color drained from his cheeks so quickly he looked ill. His eyes darted from my calm face to the open box on the kitchen island, then directly to the officers. His mouth fell open, and before his brain could catch up to the reality of the situation, the fatal words spilled from his lips. "Please do not tell me they actually did it." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The silence that followed was suffocating. Officer Ramirez slowly stood up straight, his hand drifting instinctively toward his notebook. Officer Bennett turned his attention toward the entryway, his eyes narrowing with professional suspicion. But my reaction was entirely internal. Training had taught me to identify discrepancies to catch the specific lie that unraveled a financial narrative. Liam had just handed me the ultimate discrepancy. I repeated the phrase in my mind, dissecting every single syllable. He did not ask what was going on. He did not ask why the police were standing in our kitchen. He did not ask what was inside the box on the counter. He already knew. He knew about the hit and run. He knew about the bloody scarf. He knew about the note demanding I take the fall for my sister. He knew my parents were coming to drop off the package tonight. He knew absolutely everything before he even turned the key in the lock. The betrayal was living inside my own home, sleeping in my bed. For a fraction of a second, the only sound in the kitchen was the hum of the refrigerator. Liam realized his catastrophic error the moment the words left his mouth. I watched his eyes dart frantically between the two uniformed officers and the open box on the island. The panic on his face instantly morphed into a desperate theatrical display of spousal concern. He took a cautious step toward me, raising his hands, palms outward, like he was approaching a frightened animal. He tried to compose his features into a mask of gentle empathy, completely ignoring the officers whose hands were resting on their utility belts. "Emma, honey, you need to take a breath," Liam said, his voice dropping an octave to sound soothing. He turned his attention to Officer Ramirez and offered a tight, apologetic smile. "Gentlemen, I am so sorry for the confusion. My wife has been under an immense amount of pressure at work lately. She is a forensic accountant for high-tier corporate clients, and the hours have been brutal. She is completely exhausted. She is just overworked and clearly having some kind of mental break." Officer Bennett did not relax his posture. He gestured toward the bloodied scarf. "And the box on the counter, sir." Liam forced out a hollow, dismissive laugh. "It has to be a morbid prank," he insisted, refusing to look directly at the shattered BMW emblem or the dried blood. "Some kids in the neighborhood, or maybe a disgruntled client of hers trying to scare her. Emma has not been sleeping well, and her paranoia has been off the charts. She is connecting dots that do not exist. Please let me just take her upstairs so she can rest. You guys can throw that trash away and head out. We are so sorry to waste your evening." He reached out to grab my arm, attempting to physically steer me away from the evidence. I did not scream. I did not yank my arm away. I simply stepped backward out of his reach. The cold, analytical part of my brain, the part that lived for numbers, timelines, and undeniable facts, snapped fully into focus. I was not going to play the role of the hysterical, overworked wife. I looked at Liam, really looked at him, and saw a man desperately trying to manipulate a ledger that was already completely unbalanced. "Officer Ramirez." I said, my tone as flat and professional as if I were delivering an audit finding in a boardroom. "Please note that my husband is attempting to physically remove me from an active crime scene and dismiss physical evidence of a felony hit and run." I turned my gaze back to Liam, pinning him under a relentless stare. Liam swallowed hard, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. "Emma, stop this right now," he hissed through gritted teeth, dropping the gentle husband act for a split second before remembering the audience. "You are embarrassing yourself." "No. Liam, I am auditing your statement," I replied coldly. "Let us start with your initial reaction. When you walked through that door, you did not ask why the police were here. You did not ask if I was safe. You took one look at the situation and said, 'Please do not tell me they actually did it.'" I crossed my arms, stepping closer to him. "In the English language, pronouns require an antecedent. Who exactly is the they you were referring to? And more importantly, what is the it that you hoped they had not actually done?" Liam stammered, his eyes darting to the floor. I meant whoever dropped off this prank. I hoped they had not actually gone through with scaring you." "Your phrasing implies prior knowledge of an event," I countered, raising my voice just enough to ensure the officers caught every word. "You said actually did it. The word actually denotes that a plan was discussed, debated, or threatened beforehand, and you were expressing shock that the theoretical plan had been executed in reality. You knew a threat existed before you walked into this house." Officer Bennett pulled out a small notepad and clicked his pen. "Sir, would you care to explain your wife's assessment?" he asked, his tone shifting from polite inquiry to official interrogation. Liam ran a hand through his hair, his composure crumbling rapidly. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "She twists words for a living. She is twisting mine. I am just a concerned husband coming home from a long day at the office. That brings me to my second discrepancy." I continued, not allowing him a single moment to recover. "Let us examine your timeline. You claim you are coming home from a long day at the office. You are a senior account manager. It is a Tuesday in the middle of the quarter. For the past 3 years, you have never returned home from the office before 7 in the evening on a Tuesday because of your weekly regional strategy meeting." I glanced at the digital clock on the oven. "It is currently 6:15. You arrived at exactly 6:10. You are nearly a full hour early." Liam opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "Furthermore, I noted your usual commute takes exactly 1 hour. That means you left the office at exactly 5:10, meaning you skipped your mandatory meeting entirely. Why would you abandon your professional obligations to rush home today, specifically today, unless you were anticipating the arrival of a very specific package?" I watched him struggle to fabricate a plausible excuse. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and absolute panic. His chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. The silence stretched heavy and condemning. Liam thought he could manipulate the facts, but he forgot that I dismantle liars for a living. His gaslighting strategy had completely and utterly failed today. Officer Ramirez finally broke the suffocating silence. He did not address Liam again. Instead, he pulled a heavy plastic evidence bag from his tactical belt and carefully deposited the silver box, the bloodied cashmere scarf, the shattered BMW emblem, and the typed extortion note inside. The zip seal closing sounded as loud as a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. He handed me a business card with a case number scribbled on the back. "We are opening an official investigation. Mrs. Wilson," he stated, his voice carrying the heavy weight of the law. "Do not touch your vehicle. Do not contact your parents under any circumstances. A detective will be in touch with you first thing tomorrow morning." Officer Bennett gave Liam a hard, lingering look, silently warning him against trying anything foolish, before following his partner out the front door. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving Liam and me completely alone. The instant the police cruiser pulled out of the driveway, the atmosphere in the room violently fractured. Liam dropped the concerned husband routine entirely. His face twisted into an ugly snarl, his features contorting with aggressive, defensive rage. "Are you insane?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You just handed your family over to the cops. You could have signed a piece of paper, taken the money, and we would have been set for life." I stood my ground, my posture rigid and unyielding. The sheer audacity of his statement was staggering. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I looked at the man I had shared my bed with for 5 years and saw a complete stranger. "You wanted me to take the fall for a felony hit and run," I replied, my tone freezing. "You wanted me to go to prison so you could enjoy a $2 million payout." Liam scoffed, stepping toward me with his fists clenched at his sides. "You are so dramatic, Emma. With your clean record, you would have gotten probation, maybe a few months in a minimum security facility. Your father had it all worked out with his lawyers. It was a flawless plan until you panicked and called the police like an idiot. A flawless plan." I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "A plan you actively participated in. A plan you knew about before you even walked through that door tonight. You conspired with my parents to frame me." Liam sneered, shaking his head in disgust. "You are impossible to live with. Always so rigid, always so obsessed with the rules. Your family was offering us a way out, a way to have some real wealth, and you ruined it." I felt no heartbreak, only a sharp, clarifying disgust. "Give me your keys," I demanded. Liam paused, his aggressive posture faltering for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" I stepped closer, closing the distance between us, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Give me your house keys, your car keys, and the garage remote. You do not live here anymore. Get out of my house." He tried to laugh, a weak, sputtering sound. "You cannot kick me out, Emma. My name is on the mortgage, too." "Actually," I countered smoothly, "my name is the only one on the deed. I paid the down payment from my personal savings before we were married, and the property remains my sole asset. You are nothing but a guest, and your invitation has just been permanently revoked." I held out my hand, palm up. "The keys! Right now!" Liam stared at me, searching my face for any sign of hesitation or weakness. He found absolutely none. Muttering a string of vile curses, he pulled out his key ring and threw it onto the floor at my feet. "You are going to regret this," he spat, turning on his heel. He grabbed his leather briefcase from the entryway table and stormed out into the cold night air. I slammed the heavy door shut behind him and immediately engaged the deadbolt, the chain lock, and the security latch. I stood in the darkened foyer, listening to the sound of his car engine revving aggressively as he sped away. The sudden silence that fell over the house was absolute and terrifying. I walked slowly back into the kitchen, staring at the empty space on the island where the silver box had been resting just minutes ago. The gravity of the situation pressed down on me like a physical weight. I was completely isolated. My father, my mother, my sister, and my own husband had united in a coordinated conspiracy to destroy my life. Every single person I was supposed to trust had actively plotted to sacrifice me. There was no safe harbor, no family to lean on, and no partner to confide in. I was entirely alone. But isolation breeds clarity. I refused to be a victim in their twisted game. If they wanted to play dirty, I was going to rewrite the rules. I immediately transitioned into tactical mode. I walked to the security panel in the hallway and changed the master passcode, ensuring Liam could not disable the alarms remotely. I moved through the house, meticulously checking every window latch and drawing every single blind. I went into my home office and booted up my encrypted laptop. I systematically changed all the passwords to my personal bank accounts, my email, and my professional servers. I knew Liam had a habit of snooping, and I needed to lock him out before he could do any financial damage. I pulled a heavy external hard drive from my fireproof safe and began running a full backup of all my personal data. I needed everything secured. I moved back to the kitchen and grabbed a heavy tactical flashlight, placing it securely on my nightstand. The battle lines had been drawn. My toxic family had declared war, and I was going to be completely ready for the morning. The heavy tactical flashlight sat untouched on my nightstand when morning finally broke. Sleep had been a luxury I could not afford, my mind too consumed with fortifying my digital and physical perimeters against the people I once called family. At exactly 8 a.m., my phone vibrated with an unknown number. It was Detective Vance from the local precinct requesting my immediate presence regarding the evidence secured from my home. I dressed in a sharp, tailored navy suit, the kind I wore when deposing hostile corporate executives. I was not walking into that station as a victim. I was walking in as a forensic auditor prepared to dismantle a fraud. The police precinct buzzed with the chaotic energy of a Wednesday morning. Detective Vance, a tired man with a graying mustache and a serious demeanor, met me in the lobby. He did not lead me to a standard interview room. Instead, he guided me toward a large glass meeting room at the end of the hall. As we approached, I saw them. My father Thomas sat rigidly at the head of the table, projecting the aura of a besieged patriarch. My mother Patricia was positioned next to him, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Beside them sat a man in a bespoke charcoal pinstripe suit, his leather briefcase open, radiating the aggressive confidence of a very expensive defense attorney. Detective Vance opened the door and the room fell silent. My mother immediately gasped, pressing a hand to her chest, as if my mere presence caused her physical pain. "Oh, Emma," she cried, her voice quivering with absolute theatrical perfection. "We tried to get you help. We tried so hard to protect you from yourself." I took a seat directly across from them, ignoring her display. I placed my hands flat on the smooth table and looked at Detective Vance waiting. The lawyer stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Detective, my name is Arthur Sterling, representing Thomas and Patricia. My clients are heartbroken, but they can no longer shield their eldest daughter from the consequences of her deteriorating mental state." He turned his predatory gaze toward me. "Emma has suffered from severe unchecked paranoia and lifelong jealousy regarding her sister Brittany. The horrific package she reported last night was not a threat from her family. It was a fabricated piece of evidence entirely orchestrated by Emma herself to frame her younger sister." I sat perfectly still, letting the sheer audacity of the lie wash over me. They were not just denying the blackmail, they were actively executing a character assassination. My father leaned forward, adopting a tone of grave parental concern. "We have watched her spiral for years, Detective. Emma has always resented Brittany. Brittany is vibrant, successful, and happily married. Emma, unfortunately, has spent her life trapped in a mundane existence doing cheap bookkeeping for faceless corporations. She resents our family's success. She resents Brittany's light. When Emma accidentally hit that poor pedestrian with her own car last week, her fractured mind saw an opportunity to destroy her sister. It was a masterful performance. They were weaving a narrative that played directly into the tropes of sibling rivalry and female hysteria." Patricia let out a soft, rehearsed sob. She stole Brittany's hairbrush to plant DNA. Patricia wept, looking pleadingly at the detective. She shattered her own car emblem. She even mailed that awful box to herself. She wants to ruin her sister because she can never be her. We offered to pay for a psychiatric facility, but she refused. I looked at Arthur Sterling, the $2 million mentioned in the blackmail note. I stated calmly. How exactly are you explaining that Sterling did not miss a beat? A delusion, he answered smoothly. A phantom number invented by a mind desperate to cast herself as the victim of a grand conspiracy. You wrote the note, Emma. You printed it in your own home office. We have already submitted a formal request for a warrant to seize your printer and hard drives. They had anticipated my logic. They had built a false story designed to neutralize my credibility. By framing my forensic career as cheap bookkeeping, my father was deliberately minimizing my professional expertise to the police. He was painting me as a bitter minor clerk, envious of true wealth and status, rather than a highly trained investigator capable of untangling complex corporate sabotage. They were banking on the fact that the police would see a distraught, wealthy, respectable couple trying to save their unhinged daughter. Detective Vance looked at me, his pen hovering over his notepad. Do you have a response to these allegations, Emma? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. I met my father's eyes. Thomas stared back, his expression a wall of cold, unyielding granite. He was silently daring me to fight back, secure in the knowledge that his expensive lawyer and perfectly rehearsed wife had already poisoned the well. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought my analytical nature would break under the emotional weight of my own parents calling me insane. But I did not break. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not cry. I addressed the detective, keeping my posture relaxed and authoritative. Detective Vance. My father is currently executing a textbook misdirection strategy, common in corporate fraud cases when the primary suspect realizes an audit is imminent, I stated. I did not drive my vehicle last weekend. My sister Brittany possessed my keys, which I can definitively prove through security footage from my neighborhood guard gate showing her driving away on Friday evening. Furthermore, my professional reputation is easily verifiable. I do not perform cheap bookkeeping. I am a certified forensic accountant who routinely assists federal agencies in tracing laundered funds. Sterling interrupted, his voice sharp. Detective, we are not here to listen to her delusions. I stood up, smoothing my jacket. Test the blood on the scarf against the victim. You will easily find your driver. Sterling pulled a thick paper from his leather briefcase and slid it across the polished table. It was a pre-written confession outlining a tragic narrative of a manic episode leading to vehicular manslaughter. Sign this, Emma Sterling said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. We can arrange for an immediate psychiatric evaluation. The courts look favorably upon defendants who seek help voluntarily. Do not force us to proceed with a hostile trial. I did not even bother reading the document. I pushed it back with a single manicured finger, maintaining unbroken eye contact with the man trying to sell my freedom. I am declining your generous offer. Arthur, I replied, my voice steady and completely void of emotion. Detective Vance, unless you are placing me under arrest right now, this meeting is over. I am leaving. Vance did not move to stop me. He simply watched, his expression unreadable, as I stood up, smoothed the lapels of my navy suit, and walked out of the glass room. I left my parents sitting in their righteous indignation, my father turning purple with suppressed rage, and my mother wiping her theatrical tears instantly the moment she realized her performance had utterly failed. The heavy precinct doors closed behind me, shutting out the sterile, aggressive atmosphere of the interrogation. I navigated the concrete stairwell down to the underground parking garage. The air was damp, smelling of motor oil and exhaust. My heels clicked rhythmically against the pavement, echoing through the cavernous, dimly lit space. The fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shadows across the rows of parked vehicles. I needed to get to my car, drive back to my fortified house, and begin executing a massive financial audit of every single shared asset Liam and I possessed. My mind was already categorizing tasks, separating the emotional betrayal from the logistical requirements of survival. I was so deeply entrenched in my mental spreadsheets that I almost missed the sound. A soft, breathless laugh echoed from the far corner of the parking structure near a cluster of support pillars. The sound was instantly recognizable. It was a high musical giggle, the exact sound that had garnered my parents' absolute devotion since childhood. It was Brittany. I froze, every muscle in my body locked into place. I moved silently, slipping behind a massive concrete pillar just a few yards away from where the laugh had originated. I pressed my back against the rough, cold stone, slowing my breathing to absolute silence. I peered carefully around the edge. There, hidden in the shadows between a heavy black vehicle and a concrete retaining wall, stood my sister. But she was not alone. Liam was with her. He had his hands wrapped securely around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. Brittany reached up, burying her fingers in his hair, and pulled him down into a deep, desperate kiss. It was not a comforting embrace between a concerned brother-in-law and a distressed sister. It was a hungry, practiced, possessive kiss that spoke of deep familiarity. A wave of physical nausea hit me, but my forensic training instantly suppressed the emotional shock. I did not gasp. I did not reveal my presence. I stood in the shadows and audited the scene unfolding right in front of my eyes. Liam pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. He let out a heavy sigh, running a hand down her back. She kicked me out. Brit. Liam murmured, his voice laced with venom. I went to the house to run interference just like we planned, but she had the police there waiting. She figured out the timeline. She took my keys. Brittany stroked his cheek, her expression twisting into a cruel pout. She always ruins everything, Brittany whispered, her tone dripping with genuine malice. I told Daddy we should have just reported the car stolen, but he said this was the perfect way to solve our Emma problem. We get the heat off me for hitting that guy, and we get her locked away. With her in prison or a psychiatric ward, you gain full control of the house and the accounts. We could finally stop sneaking around completely. We could have taken the offshore money and left tonight. Liam kissed her neck, a sound of frustration escaping his lips. She is too smart, Liam grumbled. Sterling is pushing the insanity angle upstairs with your parents right now, but Emma did not crack. She is going to dig into the finances, Britt. If she runs an audit on my accounts, she is going to find the transfers. She will know I have been funneling our savings into the escrow for our new condo. The final puzzle piece snapped into place with deafening clarity. The entire picture was suddenly illuminated, stark and horrifying. This was never just about saving the golden child from a hit-and-run charge. The accident was simply a convenient catalyst for a much darker, calculated conspiracy. My husband and my sister were having a long-term affair. They were using my parents' blind favoritism and deep pockets to orchestrate my complete destruction. They wanted my house, my savings, and my freedom. They intended to frame me, institutionalize me, or imprison me, seizing my assets to fund their new life together. My parents were active participants, willing to sacrifice their eldest daughter to ensure Brittany got exactly what she wanted, including my husband. I stood behind the pillar, the cold concrete seeping through my jacket. The magnitude of the betrayal should have crushed me. It should have sent me weeping to the dirty garage floor. Instead, it forged an unbreakable armor around my chest. They had grossly underestimated their target. Liam thought I was just a rigid accountant, and Brittany thought I was expendable. They had handed me the motive, the means, and the financial trail. I silently retreated into the shadows. My mind was no longer running defensive calculations. The offensive war had officially begun. I remained pressed against the cold concrete pillar, my breathing shallow and measured, as the loud echoes of their footsteps faded away toward the parking garage elevators. The heavy metal doors clattered shut, plunging the lower level back into its usual damp silence. The adrenaline that had spiked in my veins during their vile display of affection was rapidly cooling, crystallizing into pure, unadulterated resolve. My husband and my sister had meticulously engineered my downfall, leveraging my parents' blind adoration for their golden child to secure my incarceration and steal my assets. They believed they held all the cards, assuming I would remain the obedient passive victim my family had always conditioned me to be. I took a slow step away from the pillar, my mind already outlining the preliminary steps of a comprehensive financial audit to trace those embezzled funds when a heavy footstep scraped against the pavement behind me. I spun around my hand, instinctively dropping into my purse to grasp the heavy flashlight I had brought from home. A tall figure detached himself from the shadows of a dark utility van parked 2 spaces away. He raised his hands slowly, palms outward, in a gesture of immediate surrender. It was Jamal, the husband of Brittany. At 30 years old, Jamal possessed a formidable presence, carrying the sharp, authoritative aura of a seasoned assistant district attorney. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored gray suit, his expression a tight mask of controlled intensity. I had always liked Jamal. He was fiercely intelligent and grounded qualities that constantly made me wonder how he managed to endure my shallow sister. Right now, his dark eyes held a dangerous, simmering focus that mirrored my own internal fury. "Emma, do not hit me," Jamal said, his deep voice carrying a hushed, lethal resonance across the empty concrete structure. He stepped into the dim, fluorescent light, lowering his hands to his sides. "I have been watching them for the last 20 minutes. I saw you hiding here." He reached into his leather briefcase, withdrawing a thick manila folder stamped with the bright red seal of the district attorney office. He extended the heavy packet toward me. I took the folder, the weight of the classified documents grounding me in the surreal moment. Jamal looked toward the elevators, where his wife had just disappeared with my husband, his jaw tightening before his gaze snapped back to mine. "They think they fooled the cops, but they did not fool a prosecutor. My wife lied to me about taking the car to the shop. We need to talk." I stared at the red seal on the folder, a profound sense of vindication washing over me. I was not fighting this battle alone. "You knew she was lying," I murmured, opening the cover to see crime scene photographs and witness statements from the hit and run. Jamal nodded, his hands casually sliding into his trouser pockets, a stark contrast to the aggressive posture he radiated. "Brittany told me her vehicle suffered a catastrophic engine failure on Thursday afternoon." He explained, his tone completely void of the theatrical emotion my parents had displayed upstairs. "She claimed it was towed to a specialty mechanic outside the city. But I ran the license plate through our automated traffic camera database this morning. Her car never left the immediate vicinity of our neighborhood. She parked it in your parents' private garage." I looked up from the documents, meeting his calculating stare. "She needed an excuse to borrow my car," I replied. "My parents bullied me into handing over my keys on Friday under the pretense of supporting her weekend trip. She used my vehicle to hit that pedestrian, and then they orchestrated a scheme to make me take the fall." I closed the folder, gripping it tightly. "They tried to blackmail me last night with a bloody scarf, a broken piece of my car, and a demand to confess in exchange for $2 million wired to an offshore account." His eyes narrowed, processing the sheer audacity of the extortion plot. "That explains the withdrawal requests," Jamal stated, leaning against the concrete pillar I had just vacated. "I handle our joint finances. Over the past 3 weeks, Brittany has been attempting to liquidate several of our high-yield investment portfolios, claiming she wanted to purchase an investment property in cash. She needed capital to fund her escape." I took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the final brutal piece of the puzzle. "It is not just an escape, Jamal," I said softly. "It is an elopement. I just watched them kissing right where you are standing. Liam and Brittany have been having an affair. They plan to use my assets and your liquidated portfolios to buy a luxury condo downtown and disappear together while I rot in a psychiatric ward or a prison cell." Jamal did not flinch. He did not shout or punch the concrete pillar in a fit of masculine rage. Instead, a chilling, terrifying calm settled over his features. The betrayal was absolute, but for a prosecutor, betrayal was merely evidence. He processed the emotional devastation with the ruthless efficiency of a predator locking onto its prey. So they intend to steal our money, destroy your freedom, and walk away clean. Jamal summarized his voice, dropping to a dangerous whisper. Your parents are currently upstairs laying the groundwork for your institutionalization, validating a false narrative of sibling jealousy. They are building a criminal case against you based entirely on manufactured evidence and perjury. Exactly, I confirmed, feeling a powerful alliance forging between us in the cold parking garage. Two logical, analytical minds, completely stripped of familial loyalty, uniting against a shared enemy. Jamal pushed off the pillar, a predatory smile playing at the corners of his mouth. As an assistant district attorney, I have full access to subpoena financial records, he said. Let us go straight to work, I replied, unlocking my car doors. The war had officially begun. We left the precinct parking garage in separate vehicles to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Following the GPS coordinates, Jamal texted to my encrypted phone. I drove 30 miles past the city limits. The manicured suburbs gave way to cracked asphalt and neglected industrial lots. My destination was a dilapidated diner sitting on the edge of a forgotten county highway. The parking lot was empty save for Jamal's black sedan parked near the rear dumpster. It was exactly the isolated environment we needed to operate without the looming threat of Thomas tracking my phone. I pulled my car into an obscured space and grabbed my laptop bag. The bell chimed a harsh metallic note as I stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and fried grease. Jamal was already seated in a corner booth facing the entrance. He had shed his suit jacket, revealing a stark focus that commanded the small space. I slid into the cracked leather seat opposite him, placing my bag on the sticky laminate table. A waitress approached, but Jamal dismissed her with a gentle wave, signaling that we required absolute privacy. The moment we were alone, the heavy silence evaporated, replaced by the sharp cadence of tactical planning. We need to establish the exact parameters of the threat, I stated, opening my laptop. I am locked out of the precinct, and my parents have Arthur Sterling manipulating the narrative. What do you have? Jamal leaned forward. His dark eyes were cold, calculating, and completely devoid of the familial warmth I usually saw. He was no longer playing the supportive husband. He was operating as a prosecutor. The situation is significantly worse than an insurance fraud scheme or a simple hit and run. Jamal began, his voice dropping to a gravelly register. I pulled the preliminary police report using my credentials before I left the courthouse. The pedestrian Brittany struck on Friday night did not just suffer minor injuries. He is currently on life support at Mercy General in a deep coma. The words slammed into my chest. A coma. The stakes had just multiplied exponentially. This was not a misdemeanor property damage case. If that man dies, this escalates from a felony hit and run to vehicular manslaughter. Jamal continued delivering the facts. And because your parents actively engaged in blackmail, evidence tampering, and filing a false police report by trying to pin the crime on you, we are now looking at a massive criminal conspiracy. They are attempting to frame you for a crime that carries a potential sentence of up to 15 years. I stared at the table, processing their depravity. They were willing to lock me away for over a decade just to spare Brittany a court date and secure my financial assets for Liam. I will not allow my wife to turn me into an accessory to murder, Jamal stated. I took an oath to uphold the law. I refuse to be married to a murderer, and I absolutely refuse to let her and your husband destroy an innocent woman to cover their tracks. We are going to bury them, Emma, but we have to do it flawlessly. Thomas has enough liquid capital to buy a scapegoat, bribe a judge, or bury the physical evidence. I nodded, the forensic accountant inside me taking the reins. Emotion was a liability. Data was our only weapon. Thomas is arrogant, I replied. He believes wealth provides absolute immunity. He thinks because Sterling is managing the police, he has won. But Liam is sloppy. Liam is driven by greed and panic, which means he is leaving a massive digital footprint. I will initiate a forensic audit into every joint account and investment portfolio Liam has access to. I brought up a blank spreadsheet. I will trace the money, I explained. Liam mentioned using my assets and your liquidated portfolios to buy a luxury condo downtown. Real estate requires a paper trail. Escrow deposits, wire transfers, email correspondence with realtors. I will find the exact property they are trying to purchase. Furthermore, the extortion note promised $2 million wired to an offshore account. If my father has initiated that transfer to secure my silence, I can trace the routing numbers and prove premeditated bribery. Jamal pulled a sleek tablet from his briefcase, mirroring my analytical energy. While you dismantle their financial infrastructure, I am going to secure the physical and digital evidence, he said. As a prosecutor, I have backdoor access to the city surveillance grid. I will pull the traffic camera footage from the exact intersection where the pedestrian was struck. I will cross-reference the timestamps with Brittany's cellular tower pings to place her at the scene of the crime. I will also pull Liam's phone records to establish the timeline of their affair and prove they were conspiring together. We cannot move until the trap is completely set, I warned, locking eyes with him. If my father catches wind of this, he will freeze my accounts and fly Brittany out of the country before the police can issue a warrant. We have to build an airtight, undeniable case, present it to the district attorney, and execute the arrest simultaneously. Jamal nodded slowly, a predatory glint returning to his eyes. We gather the proof, we corner them, and we burn their perfect little empire to the ground. He raised his coffee mug in a silent, grim toast. To the audit. To the prosecution, I replied. We sat in the dim, grease-stained diner for another 3 hours, mapping out every single move, countermove, and legal trap we needed to spring. The isolated environment provided the perfect incubator for our alliance. We were two betrayed spouses, stripped of our illusions, armed with specialized skills, and driven by a shared, icy determination. My family had tried to bury me alive, but they forgot that I knew exactly how to dig. And now I had the entire justice system sitting right across the table. We left the diner just as the afternoon sun began to dip behind the tree line, casting shadows across the cracked asphalt. Jamal drove ahead, navigating a circuitous route to ensure we were not followed while I trailed behind. Our destination was a generic roadside motel in the neighboring county. It accepted cash without asking questions, offering the perfect blind spot. Jamal secured a room at the far end of the exterior corridor, away from the streetlights and security cameras. I pulled my vehicle into a spot obscured by overgrown hedges, grabbed my laptop bag, and hurried inside. The room smelled of industrial bleach and stale smoke, but it had a heavy deadbolt and a desk. That was all I needed. Jamal pulled the curtains tightly shut, plunging the space into shadows, before flipping on a single desk lamp. I unpacked my equipment, arranging my laptop, a portable encrypted router, and charging cables across the scratched laminate surface. The digital hunt was about to begin. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a familiar rhythm that always calmed my nerves. Forensic accounting is not just about crunching numbers, it is about finding the story hidden inside the ledger. Liam thought he was clever, but he possessed the financial sophistication of an amateur. I started with our primary joint checking account, the one we used for the mortgage and utilities. On the surface, the balance looked normal, carefully maintained to avoid arousing suspicion. But I was not looking at the surface. I deployed specialized tracing software I typically reserved for money laundering cases, feeding it Liam's social security number and primary banking credentials. The software immediately began aggressively scraping the dark corners of his financial footprint, pulling credit reports, tax filings, and hidden financial profiles. Jamal stood behind me, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the lines of code cascade down the screen. Within 10 minutes, the first alarm tripped. The software flagged a massive discrepancy between Liam's declared income and his actual debt ratio. He had systematically opened 3 separate credit cards under a shell corporation, effectively shielding the debt from our credit profile. I breached the security protocols on the first hidden credit card with terrifying ease. Liam had used his mother's maiden name and his childhood zip code as his security questions. It was almost insulting how little effort he put into hiding his tracks. The transaction history populated on my screen, and the sheer volume of his deceit was staggering. Over the last 8 months, Liam had racked up over $90,000 in luxury purchases. I clicked on a series of transactions from a high-end boutique located in the city's Diamond District. 2 weeks ago, he had purchased a bespoke emerald-cut tennis bracelet for $18,000. A bitter realization washed over me. I had seen that exact bracelet sparkling on my sister's wrist at my parents' house just last Sunday. When I complimented it, Brittany had smirked and claimed it was an early bonus from her father. The physical evidence of their affair was right there, itemized in stark black and white. Receipts for weekend getaways to a secluded mountain resort, expensive lingerie, and lavish dinners at restaurants where he claimed he was entertaining prospective clients. He was not just buying her affection, I said, my voice echoing off the cheap motel walls. He was outfitting her for their new life. Jamal leaned over my shoulder, his gaze fixed on the screen. Look at the cash advances, he pointed out, his tone tight. He is pulling maximum liquidity. I highlighted a recurring pattern of massive cash withdrawals. Liam was bleeding his hidden credit lines dry and funneling the cash into a decentralized digital wallet. I initiated a secondary trace following the cryptocurrency conversions as they bounced through several intermediary nodes designed to obscure their final destination. The money eventually landed in a localized escrow account. I cracked the escrow file, revealing the pending purchase agreement for a $3 million penthouse overlooking the harbor. The buyers were listed under a freshly incorporated holding company, but the signature on the wire transfer authorization belonged unmistakably to Liam. They were closing on the property this Friday. The timeline was incredibly tight, explaining why they needed me institutionalized so urgently. They needed my half of our legitimate savings to finalize the down payment. I dug deeper into the escrow funding, determined to map every single penny. As I audited the incoming wire transfers, a glaring anomaly flashed across the ledger. The numbers did not align. Liam's hidden credit cards and the liquidated assets Jamal had mentioned earlier accounted for only half of the massive down payment sitting in the escrow account. There was another funding source, a massive influx of capital originating from a completely separate entity. I isolated the routing number associated with the largest wire transfer, a single deposit of $500,000 that had cleared just 24 hours prior. I ran the routing number through a commercial database, watching the screen as the system painstakingly decoded the originating institution. The progress bar inched forward, the silence in the motel room stretching into eternity. Then the result populated. It was an executive corporate account belonging to Sterling and Vance Holdings. That was my father's primary manufacturing corporation. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. I tapped the keyboard, initiating a deep dive into the corporate ledger. The authorization for the $500,000 transfer required executive approval. I pulled the digital signature attached to the wire. It was not authorized by my father. The digital signature belonged to Liam. Liam was not just cheating on me with my sister. He was actively embezzling massive amounts of corporate funds directly from my father's empire to finance their getaway. The revelation fundamentally altered the battlefield. My father was fiercely protective of his wealth, completely unaware that the man he was currently conspiring with to destroy me was actively robbing him blind. Jamal leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine as he stared at the digital signature glowing on the screen. He let out a low whistle, the sound cutting through the stale motel air. "Your husband is signing off on $500,000 of corporate funds," Jamal stated, his voice tight with disbelief. "Thomas is a paranoid control freak. He would never give Liam unchecked executive access to the primary corporate treasury just because he is married to you. There is a missing link here. Liam is not just embezzling. He has the keys to the kingdom." I stared at the blinking cursor, my forensic instincts flaring. Jamal was absolutely right. My father trusted no one, not even his own family, with the core finances of his manufacturing empire. For Liam to possess executive authorization tokens, he had to be deeply embedded in the financial architecture of the company itself. I needed to see the entire structural ledger, not just the isolated escrow transfers. I backed out of the individual wire portal and targeted the main mainframe of the holding company. The firewall was robust, a layered security grid designed to repel corporate espionage. But I was not an outsider launching a brute force attack. I was the biological daughter of Thomas, and I had spent my early career modernizing the very financial systems he still relied upon. I knew the backdoor architectures, the legacy codes, and the structural blind spots he had neglected to update. I bypassed the first two security gateways using administrative bypass protocols I had mapped years ago. The third layer required biometric authentication, but I bypassed it by routing my access through a ghost terminal previously assigned to a retired chief financial officer. The system granted me access. I bypassed the surface-level operational accounts, diving straight into the deep structural ledgers where the true financial heart of the corporation pulsed. What I found did not just explain the unprecedented access of Liam, it completely dismantled everything I thought I knew about the wealth of my family. I opened a master spreadsheet hidden behind a labyrinth of encrypted subfolders. Rows and columns of massive, irregular capital influxes filled the screen. Tens of millions of dollars were being injected into the manufacturing company under the guise of international supply chain acquisitions and offshore consulting fees. But there were no physical invoices, no shipping manifests, and no tangible goods attached to these transactions. The money was entering the accounts as phantom revenue being aggressively mixed with legitimate manufacturing profits and then cycled out as clean, untraceable dividends. My father is not just running a manufacturing company, I whispered, my voice completely devoid of emotion. He is running a massive money laundering operation. Jamal pulled a chair closer, his eyes scanning the cascading lines of financial data. He recognized the patterns instantly. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands, dummy corporations in Panama, routing structures designed to scrub the origin of the funds. This is systematic washing on an industrial scale, he noted, his legal mind analyzing the criminal infrastructure. Look at the volume, Emma. This is not corporate tax evasion. This is organized crime. I continued tracing the digital breadcrumbs, following the phantom revenue as it was sanitized and distributed. Every single fraudulent transaction, every fake invoice, and every washed dividend carried the same encrypted authorization token. I cracked the metadata of the token, matching it to an internal user identification code. The screen blinked, revealing the architect of this massive financial deceit. It was Liam. My husband was not just an opportunistic embezzler. He was the chief money launderer for my father. He was the one cooking the books, burying the dirty money beneath layers of legitimate manufacturing data, and ensuring Thomas walked away clean. That was why my father was so desperate to protect him. That was why my parents were willing to sacrifice their eldest daughter to cover up the hit and run. If Liam went down for vehicular manslaughter, his financial records would be subpoenaed and the entire money laundering empire would collapse. They were not protecting Brittany or Liam, they were protecting themselves. I initiated a targeted search specifically for the $2 million they had offered me as blackmail to take the fall. I located the exact escrow account Arthur Sterling had referenced during our interrogation room confrontation. The funds were sitting in a highly obscured trust waiting for my signature. I traced the money backwards, stripping away the routing numbers and corporate veils. The source of the $2 million did not originate from the legitimate personal savings or the legal business profits of my father. The funds were traced directly back to a holding company flagged by federal authorities as a front for a prominent international narcotics cartel. The money they were using to buy my silence, the money they intended to use to fund my destruction, was dirty cartel cash. The reality of our situation crystallized with terrifying clarity. This was no longer a domestic dispute or a case of simple corporate fraud. We had just stumbled into the financial epicenter of a ruthless criminal syndicate. Jamal stared at the screen, the stark realization mirroring my own. Your father and your husband are washing money for a cartel? Jamal stated, his voice completely steady despite the lethal implications. The hit and run is just a loose thread that threatens to unravel a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. If the police look too closely at Brittany and Liam, the cartel is exposed. They offered you $2 million because you are the perfect scapegoat. If you take the fall and go to a psychiatric ward, the investigation ends, the money keeps flowing, and everyone stays alive. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, absorbing the immense weight of the danger we were currently in. My parents had sold my freedom to protect their criminal empire, and my husband had orchestrated the transaction. I will not break down today. I took a deep breath, letting the sterile air of the motel room fill my lungs. The glowing spreadsheet reflecting cartel transactions remained on the screen, a digital monument to family treachery. Jamal placed a hand on my shoulder, an anchor in the sea of criminality we had uncovered. The harsh vibration of my burner phone shattered the silence. The encrypted device rattled against the laminate desk. I stared at the illuminated screen. The caller ID displayed a restricted number, but I instantly recognized the digital routing pattern. It was the secure line from my father's executive suite. He was utilizing the same encrypted network he used to authorize his illicit transfers. I locked eyes with Jamal, pointing at the screen. He nodded, connecting an audio capture device to the phone's output jack. We were gathering prosecutorial evidence. I answered and engaged the speakerphone, letting the connection fill the dim room. "Hello," Emma Thomas began, his voice dripping with patronizing warmth he weaponized before a strike. "I am glad you picked up. Your mother and I have been sick with worry." Leaving the precinct so abruptly was incredibly short-sighted. His attempt to paint himself as the concerned patriarch was nauseating. I remained completely silent. I knew his tactics. He thrived on defensive responses, waiting for his target to justify their actions so he could dismantle their arguments. By offering nothing, I forced him to step into the void. "Silence will not solve your predicament." Thomas continued, the artificial warmth bleeding from his tone, replaced by the chill of a corporate predator. "You are making the situation far more difficult than it needs to be. Arthur Sterling presented you with a very protective solution. $2 million and psychiatric care is a massive safety net. Most people facing vehicular manslaughter charges do not get a golden parachute. The fact that he was still pushing the psychiatric ward narrative, knowing he was trying to bury me alive to protect a cartel money laundering operation, ignited a focused fury in my chest. "I am not taking the fall for Brittany," I stated, my voice devoid of emotional inflection. "I know exactly what happened at that intersection. I know she was driving Liam's car." Thomas released a theatrical sigh, the sound of a parent dealing with a petulant child. "You always had an overactive imagination, Emma. But reality is dictated by the individuals writing the narrative. Right now, the narrative is out of your control." I just concluded lunch with Arthur Sterling and Detective Miller, the lead investigator assigned to the hit and run. He paused, letting the name drop with heavy significance. Jamal's eyes widened at the mention of the detective. "Detective Miller is a very reasonable man," Thomas purred. "He reviewed the evidence, including the false police report you attempted to file, and the erratic behavior displayed at the precinct. Furthermore, he found a substantial amount of cash in the trunk of Liam's vehicle, which you intended to use to flee the jurisdiction. Miller has concluded his investigation. He is drawing up an arrest warrant for you as we speak. The charge is felony hit and run upgraded to vehicular manslaughter when that pedestrian dies." My father was openly admitting to bribing a homicide detective. He was casually narrating the purchase of the justice system as if discussing a supply chain acquisition. They had planted cash in the car. They had bought the lead investigator. They were constructing a flawless, airtight frame job. "You are going to let them lock me in a cage," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat, ensuring the audio capture device picked up every nuance of his confession. "You are going to let your daughter rot in prison so your favorite child can keep her hands clean. I am protecting my family." Thomas snapped, a flash of anger breaking through his polished veneer. "Brittany has a future. Liam has a crucial role in my enterprise. You have always been the outlier, Emma. You isolate yourself with your audits and your spreadsheets. You bring no strategic value to the table. This is simply a pragmatic reassignment of liability. You will take the blame because you are the only one expendable enough to absorb it." The sheer sociopathy of his cost-benefit analysis was breathtaking. He had weighed my life against his criminal enterprise and found me lacking. Here are the terms of your surrender. Thomas dictated, assuming total command. You have exactly 24 hours to walk into the downtown precinct and submit a written confession to Detective Miller. If you do this, the $2 million trust remains active, and Arthur Sterling will negotiate a reduced sentence in a minimum security psychiatric facility. And if I decline your generous offer, I asked, leaning closer to the microphone. If you are not in custody by this time tomorrow, the consequences will be absolute. Thomas threatened, his voice dropping to a gravelly register. I will contact the senior partners at your forensic accounting firm. I will inform them that you are suffering from a psychological break and are under criminal investigation for manslaughter. Your career will evaporate. I have already instructed Liam to contact your joint financial institutions. He is initiating emergency freezes on all your shared accounts, citing erratic withdrawals. You will be penniless, unemployed, and actively hunted by the police by tomorrow afternoon. Turn yourself in, Emma. You have nowhere to run. He waited for my panic. He expected me to beg, to plead, to break down under the crushing weight of his absolute control. He believed he had cornered a scared, defenseless accountant. He did not realize he was speaking to a woman who currently held the digital ledger of his cartel money laundering syndicate. I looked at the glowing spreadsheet, then at Jamal, who gave me a sharp, approving nod. My fear vanished, replaced by a predatory calm. You chose the wrong scapegoat, Thomas, I said softly. I disconnected the line, staring at the darkened screen. The plastic casing of the burner phone felt hot against my palm. The ultimatum hung in the stale motel air, a ticking clock counting down to my total ruination. But instead of the paralyzing dread my father anticipated, a cold clarity crystallized in my mind. We had the financial ledger, but financial crimes took weeks to prosecute. We needed the murder weapon. We needed the physical proof that would instantly dismantle their fabricated timeline and stop Detective Miller from executing his corrupt warrant. Jamal did not waste a single second. He pulled his encrypted tablet from his briefcase, his prosecutor instincts overriding the shock of the cartel discovery. He needed to locate the physical asset. If Thomas is tying up loose ends with bribes and ultimatums, he is simultaneously destroying the physical evidence, Jamal stated, his fingers flying across the touchscreen. The initial police report claimed the hit and run occurred in a stolen vehicle, but we know Brittany was driving Liam's luxury sedan. That car is covered in highly specific forensic evidence, blood tissue impact transfer patterns. Thomas will not leave it sitting in a municipal impound lot where an honest technician might accidentally process it. He needs it permanently vaporized. Jamal accessed a secure restricted database utilizing his active credentials as an assistant district attorney. He bypassed the standard procedural channels, tapping directly into the automated license plate reader grid and the municipal towing registry. Your father has incredibly deep pockets, but a damaged luxury vehicle leaking coolant and missing a headlight cannot move through this city invisibly, he muttered, his dark eyes darting across lines of raw transit data. I am cross-referencing recent unauthorized tow requests with known chop shops operating entirely outside the jurisdiction of Detective Miller. A match flashed vibrant red on his screen. Jamal grabbed his keys, tossing my burner phone into my open laptop bag. Got it. A private salvage company filed a quiet transit manifest for a severely damaged, unregistered BMW exactly 1 hour ago. The destination is a salvage yard situated on the industrial waterfront. It is an unlicensed operation notorious for stripping stolen cars and crushing the frames into untraceable scrap metal. If that car goes into the compactor, we lose our only physical leverage against your sister. We sprinted out of the motel room. Jamal took the wheel of his sedan, the engine roaring to life before my passenger door was fully shut. The drive was a chaotic blur of rain-slicked asphalt and traffic delays. Jamal drove with calculated aggression, riding the shoulder-running yellow lights and navigating the labyrinth of the waterfront district with lethal precision. My hands gripped the dashboard as we swerved past abandoned warehouses and rusted shipping containers. The clock was working against us. My father operated with ruthless efficiency, and the crew at the salvage yard would not waste time processing a vehicle marked for immediate destruction. The scrapyard loomed at the dead end of a neglected service road, surrounded by a towering fence of corrugated steel topped with rusted razor wire. The heavy iron gates were fully secured with thick chains, but Jamal did not hesitate. He drove the sedan straight onto the muddy shoulder, extinguished the headlights, and killed the engine. The heavy metallic shrieks of massive industrial machinery echoed ominously from the other side of the barrier. "We go in on foot," Jamal ordered, drawing a concealed firearm from a holster beneath his suit jacket. He checked the loaded magazine with practiced efficiency. "Stay directly behind me. These men are not corporate accountants. They are paid thugs hired to dispose of massive problems, and right now we are the main problem." We slipped through a wide gap where the corrugated fencing had warped away from a concrete pillar. The yard was a sprawling apocalyptic graveyard of twisted metal, illuminated by harsh halogen floodlights. The scent of ozone-leaking dark motor oil and burning rubber assaulted my senses. We navigated through narrow canyons of stacked rusting vehicles moving silently toward the deafening roar of the central crushing unit. As we rounded a towering pile of crushed steel, the scene unfolded with horrifying clarity. A massive yellow industrial forklift was actively reversing its heavy steel prongs, carrying the unmistakable sleek chassis of a black BMW. The front end was violently crushed, the windshield extensively spiderwebbed, and the passenger side headlight was completely obliterated. It was unequivocally the vehicle belonging to Liam. The forklift pivoted sharply, raising the luxury vehicle toward the gaping rusted maw of a hydraulic compactor. Two men in dark grease-stained overalls stood near the control panel smoking cigarettes and casually watching the machinery operate. They were mere seconds away from turning the primary murder weapon into a compacted cube of unrecognizable scrap. "Stop the machine!" Jamal roared, sprinting out from the shadowy perimeter. The two men at the control panel spun around, dropping their cigarettes onto the oily concrete. The forklift operator slammed on the brakes, leaving the mangled BMW dangling precariously above the lethal crusher. A third man, built like a brick wall and holding a heavy steel wrench, stepped out from the elevated control booth, blocking our path to the vehicle. "The yard is closed," the large man growled aggressively, tapping the heavy wrench against his calloused palm. "You took a wrong turn, friend. Turn around and walk back through the fence before you get hurt." Jamal did not slow his confident pace. He marched directly into the harsh, blinding glare of the halogen lights, keeping his posture rigid and commanding. With his left hand, he reached into his breast pocket and produced his silver shield, holding it high for the men to see. "Assistant District Attorney Jamal Brooks," he announced, his authoritative voice slicing cleanly through the mechanical din. "I am ordering you to immediately step away from the control panel. That vehicle is now officially classified as core physical evidence in an active ongoing homicide investigation." The large man with the wrench froze, his eyes darting from the silver badge to Jamal's unwavering stance. The mechanical roar of the massive compactor idled, creating a tense, humming silence across the sprawling industrial yard. Jamal did not lower his shield. He forcefully ordered the forklift operator to set the vehicle down gently on the cracked concrete, warning that any further damage to the chassis would result in immediate obstruction of justice charges. Grumbling foul curses under his breath, the operator reluctantly complied. The heavy steel prongs lowered, depositing the mangled BMW onto the oily pavement with a sharp metallic crunch. The scrapyard owner, a wiry man with grease-stained hands and a nervous twitch, emerged from a rusted trailer acting as an office. He immediately pulled out his cellular phone, jabbing an angry finger toward Jamal. He sneered, declaring he was calling his powerful client, explicitly threatening that Thomas would absolutely bury us for trespassing on his private property. Jamal completely ignored the petty threat, pulling his encrypted phone from his pocket to initiate a secure call. He bypassed the municipal precinct, entirely knowing Detective Miller would intercept any standard dispatch and immediately tip off my father. Instead, he contacted a highly trusted independent forensic consultancy team he frequently used for high-stakes federal prosecutions, offering them triple their usual emergency rate for an immediate, completely discreet deployment to our exact coordinates. The wait felt agonizing. The scrapyard owner paced aggressively near the crushed vehicle, his phone pressed tightly to his ear as he frantically updated my father on our sudden intrusion. He kept shooting venomous glares in our direction, loudly promising that high-powered attorneys were already racing toward the industrial waterfront to expel us from the premises. I stood a few paces behind Jamal, the damp chill of the night air seeping through my coat, but my focus remained entirely locked on the ruined luxury sedan. The shattered windshield and deployed airbags painted a violent, undeniable picture of the crash. The driver had hit the pedestrian with immense force, creating a brutal collision that my parents were desperate to pin on me. My chest tightened with a profound, icy fury. We absolutely needed the biological markers trapped inside that cabin to survive the night. Within 20 grueling minutes, an unmarked white utility van tore through the perimeter gate, its tires sliding dangerously on the muddy gravel. 3 technicians, clad in sterile Tyvek suits, piled out of the back before the vehicle even fully parked. They carried heavy metallic equipment cases and high-powered halogen floodlights, moving with militaristic precision and speed. Jamal quickly briefed their lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Eris Thorne, emphasizing the absolute necessity of speed and the imminent arrival of hostile corporate legal counsel intent on destroying the crime scene. Dr. Thorne did not waste a single breath on unnecessary questions. She barked rapid orders to her team, and they instantly swarmed the ruined BMW like a synchronized tactical unit. They erected portable floodlights around the perimeter, bathing the dark interior of the car in blinding clinical white light. One technician forced open the warped driver's side door with a heavy crowbar, the metal groaning loudly in protest. Dr. Thorne leaned deep into the cabin, her gloved hands moving meticulously over the deployed steering wheel airbag. She sprayed a specialized chemical reagent onto the deflated white fabric, instantly illuminating microscopic traces of organic matter that the naked eye could not possibly detect. Blood spatter, saliva, and skin cells transferred during the violent kinetic impact of the crash glowed faintly under the specialized ultraviolet beam. The technician beside her utilized a delicate sterile swab to collect the biological residue, carefully sealing the organic samples inside tamper-evident plastic vials. Another team member meticulously dusted the steering column, the gear shift, and the interior door handle with magnetic powder, carefully lifting a pristine set of latent fingerprints using adhesive transfer tape. The scrapyard owner yelled continuously from the sidelines, demanding they stop touching the property, but Jamal stepped squarely into his path, effectively walling him off from the ongoing forensic operation. The sudden piercing screech of high-performance tires echoed aggressively down the narrow access road, loudly signaling the dramatic arrival of the corporate cavalry. 2 sleek black sedans violently braked near the muddy entrance, and 4 men dressed in incredibly expensive tailored suits emerged, marching aggressively across the filthy yard. They were my father's elite legal fixers, heavily armed with formal cease and desist orders and an entire arsenal of verbal threats. The lead attorney, a ruthless corporate litigator I recognized from numerous tense family dinners, demanded we immediately vacate the premises, citing unlawful search and seizure without a valid municipal warrant. He loudly threatened Jamal with immediate disbarment and explicitly promised to bury the independent forensic team in endless civil litigation. Jamal simply stood his ground, maintaining absolute composure while casually checking his wristwatch. He calmly informed the furious attorney that the initial evidence collection was already complete. I watched closely as Dr. Thorne secured the final critical evidence bag inside a heavy steel lockbox, snapping the mechanical latch shut with a resounding, victorious click. She locked eyes with Jamal and gave a sharp, definitive nod. We securely possessed the organic biological swabs from the deployed airbag and the latent prints from the steering column. They had successfully extracted the undeniable physical proof that Brittany, not me, was sitting in the driver's seat when the innocent pedestrian was brutally struck. The enraged lawyers shouted empty legal threats into the cool night air, furiously demanding we surrender the lockbox immediately, but their highly aggressive posturing was entirely useless now. The raw biological data was secured completely untainted by the corrupt hands of Detective Miller. We turned our backs on the screaming attorneys and the ruined vehicle, walking briskly and confidently toward our parked car. We had successfully acquired the absolute proof of their dark conspiracy, and the trap was finally ready to snap shut permanently. Jamal steered his sedan away from the chaotic industrial waterfront, leaving my furious father and his corporate attorneys shouting in the cold rain. The heavy steel lockbox containing the biological evidence rested securely on the floorboard between my feet. We navigated the dark city streets with purposeful silence. Jamal needed to deliver the forensic samples directly to a trusted federal laboratory, entirely bypassing the corrupt local precinct and Detective Miller. I had a different destination. I requested Jamal to drop me 3 blocks from the upscale suburban house I still legally shared with my treacherous husband, the money launderer Liam. The rain masked my quiet approach through the familiar neighborhood. I slipped through the rear garden gate and unlocked the kitchen door using my physical key. The house was completely empty and suffocatingly dark. I did not engage a single light switch. I knew the layout of this property perfectly. Liam would inevitably come here tonight. He had already frozen my bank accounts upon the explicit orders of my father, but he still needed to neutralize my physical backups. My home office contained hard drives holding my audit trails, which could easily expose his entire illicit cartel money laundering operation. He operated under the arrogant assumption that I was currently panicked, defenseless, and hiding from the corrupt police warrant. He would expect an easy theft. I intended to give him exactly what he wanted, but completely on my terms. I opened my tactical backpack and extracted 3 tiny high-definition surveillance cameras. Jamal had procured these devices from his trusted law enforcement contacts. I mounted the first camera inside the living room bookshelf, aiming the lens directly at the front entrance. I placed the second camera above the kitchen archway. The final device went straight into my private home office. The cameras synced flawlessly to my encrypted mobile application, providing a comprehensive view of the entire ground floor in crisp infrared night vision. Now I needed the perfect bait. I booted up my secondary laptop and accessed a secure cloud folder. I rapidly compiled a convincing batch of false financial documents, carefully mirroring the exact formatting of the genuine cartel ledgers I had previously discovered. I labeled the folder with an urgent title, ensuring it looked like a desperate compilation of evidence meant for federal investigators. I deliberately left the laptop screen glowing very brightly on my wooden mahogany desk. With the trap flawlessly prepared, I retreated into the heavy shadows of the spacious living room. I positioned myself in a large leather armchair, situated perfectly in the darkest corner of the room. From this concealed vantage point, I commanded a clear view of the hallway leading directly toward the office. I slowed my breathing, letting the rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock ground my racing pulse. The hours dragged past with agonizing slowness. Every creak of the settling house amplified the intense anticipation burning within my chest. I remained utterly motionless, waiting for the rat to finally arrive. Shortly after 2 in the morning, the heavy front door clicked softly. The deadbolt slid back with a metallic whisper, followed by the quiet squeak of hinges. Liam stepped into the foyer. He moved with the practiced stealth of a man completely accustomed to hiding his treacherous actions. I watched his glowing green silhouette navigate across my phone screen. He wore a dark hooded jacket, and he carried a heavy canvas duffel bag. He bypassed the living room entirely, creeping straight down the corridor toward my office. He was behaving exactly like the predictable, greedy corporate criminal I hunted tonight. Through the mobile feed, I observed Liam enter the office. He immediately spotted the glowing laptop screen. I watched him drop his heavy duffel bag onto the carpeted floor and eagerly lean over the desk. He scrolled rapidly through the decrypted folder containing the fake ledger entries. A triumphant, arrogant smirk spread across his face as he falsely believed he had secured the ultimate victory. He quickly pulled a portable flash drive from his jacket pocket, jamming it aggressively into the computer port to transfer the files. He thought he was systematically erasing my only leverage against my dangerous family. I waited patiently until the file transfer reached 100%. Once Liam pocketed the drive, he grabbed the physical laptop, shoving the expensive machine roughly into his canvas bag. He turned around, believing he was executing a perfectly clean getaway. I stood up from my leather armchair, remaining concealed within the deep shadows of the spacious living room. As Liam walked confidently back down the central hallway toward the front door, I finally broke the silence. My voice was razor-sharp, slicing through the heavy darkness of our marital home with absolute unforgiving authority. "Leaving so soon, my darling?" Liam violently flinched, dropping the heavy canvas duffel bag onto the hardwood floor with a loud thud. He spun rapidly toward the pitch-black living room, his eyes wide with sudden terror. He could not clearly see me standing within the thick shadows. "Emma!" He stammered, his voice trembling uncontrollably as his arrogant facade instantly shattered into tiny pieces. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be hiding from the police warrant." I stepped slowly forward, allowing the pale moonlight filtering through the front window to partially illuminate my cold face. "I am home, my very dear husband. My very dear." He took a nervous step backward, frantically clutching the stolen laptop bag against his chest. "I know why you broke in tonight," I stated, circling him slowly like a predator cornering wounded prey. "You needed to wipe my local drives because you are terrified. Thomas ordered you to freeze my bank accounts, but washing multiple million-dollar cartel payments leaves an indelible digital footprint. Did you genuinely think I was foolish enough to leave my authentic structural ledgers unprotected? Those files you just eagerly downloaded to your flash drive are completely fake, Liam. The real documents are safely hidden elsewhere." Realizing I had planted a decoy short-circuited his brain. The polished husband I had known wrestled with the cornered criminal he truly was before something simply snapped. The panicked tremor vanished. He let out a breathless laugh that held absolutely no humor. His charming facade evaporated into a sneering, vicious mask of contempt. "You think you are the smartest person here, Emma," he spat, moving into the center. "You sit in your office obsessing over every decimal point, convinced you hold the moral high ground. But you are blind. You audit ledgers but cannot even read the people sleeping in your own bed." I remained standing perfectly still in the shadows, my arms securely crossed over my chest. I did not interrupt, absolutely needing him to keep talking. The hidden infrared cameras were silently capturing his every movement and word. "Do you know why this is so easy?" he demanded, voice echoing. "Nobody likes you, Emma. Thomas views you as a liability, an obstacle standing in the way of corporate growth. And me, I have been suffocating in this sterile marriage for years. You are a cold, calculating machine. There is no warmth. You treat our relationship like another forensic accounting project." He paced the floor, fueled by adrenaline and resentment. "That is exactly why I turned to Brittany," he confessed, throwing the words like projectiles. "She is everything you are not. She is vibrant and compliant. She never questions the mechanics of the wealth. She simply enjoys the benefits. We have been together for 2 years, right under your nose. Every time I told you I was working late, I was at her penthouse. She makes me feel like a king while you look at me like an employee missing a deadline." His affair with my younger sister should have shattered me. A week ago, it would have brought me to my knees. But tonight, the revelation barely registered. It was another data point, another piece of evidence confirming the moral bankruptcy of my family. I kept my face entirely impassive, offering him zero emotional satisfaction. "You are remarkably quiet," Liam taunted. "No moral outrage, no tears." "That is exactly your problem. You are emotionally vacant. It made framing you the easiest decision of my life." He had crossed the threshold I was waiting for. I shifted my weight, prompting him to continue. Framing me, I asked, my voice barely a whisper, projecting the perfect image of a defeated victim. Liam scoffed, his chest puffing with pride. "Thomas and I orchestrated the narrative the moment Brittany panicked and called me from that intersection. She was driving my car intoxicated. When she hit that pedestrian, she jeopardized the entire cartel washing operation. If the police investigated her, they would invariably dig into my assets and the shell companies would collapse. We needed a firewall. You were the perfect candidate. He took a step closer, pointing a finger at my chest. I planted the $50,000 in the trunk before Thomas ordered the car sent to the scrapyard. He boasted, laying out the conspiracy with terrifying casualness. I handed Detective Miller the initial bribe from the escrow account. Thomas structured the blackmail offer, but I mapped out your psychological profile. I told him to leverage your guilt over the family legacy. We knew you would fight it, which is why we needed the cash and fabricated flight risk to force Detective Miller to expedite the arrest warrant. We built an airtight cage around you, Emma. You taking the fall protects the enterprise, protects Brittany, and removes you from my life. It is a flawless corporate restructuring. He smiled, a dark, victorious grin, illuminating his sheer sociopathy. He genuinely believed he had won. He believed his physical intimidation and the impending police warrant rendered me powerless. He thought his confession was a triumphant monologue delivered to a woman who would spend the next decade in prison. I looked at him, absorbing the complete totality of his betrayal. He had slept with my sister, laundered millions for a violent criminal syndicate, and gleefully participated in a plot to destroy my freedom. He was waiting for me to scream, to attack him, to break down and beg for mercy. Instead, I stepped aside, clearing his path to the front door. "You can leave now, Liam," I said, my voice completely steady and cold. "Take the laptop, keep the flash drive, consider it a parting gift." Liam frowned, unsettled by my lack of resistance. He gripped the canvas bag tightly, eyeing me with sudden suspicion. He expected a physical struggle for the hardware. My passive surrender confused his predator instincts. "You really are broken," he muttered, shaking his head in mock pity. "Enjoy the psychiatric ward, Emma. I will be sure to send you a postcard from the Caymans when Brittany and I take our next vacation." He turned his back on me, marching confidently toward the foyer. He pulled the front door open, stepping out into the cold, driving rain. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the dark house. I did not move for several minutes, listening to the sound of his car engine roaring to life and fading down the suburban street. Once the neighborhood was completely silent, I pulled my encrypted phone from my pocket and opened the surveillance application. I reviewed the footage from the living room camera. The audio was pristine. The infrared visual captured every arrogant smirk, every violent gesture, and every single syllable of his unprompted confession. He had detailed the affair, the bribery of a police detective, the planting of evidence, and his direct involvement in the cartel money laundering operation. It was a prosecutorial goldmine. I saved the digital file, uploading it to Jamal's secure server. The trap had worked. It had performed flawlessly. Liam thought he had stolen my leverage, but he freely handed me the key to his own prison cell. The heavy silence of my empty house lingered only for a fleeting moment before I shifted my focus to the final phase of our operation. The digital confession was safely in the possession of the authorities, but the public execution of my father's empire required a physical stage. That stage had already been meticulously prepared by the very architect of my suffering. It was the night of the annual corporate charity gala hosted by Thomas and Patricia. In a display of sickening, calculated irony, the beneficiary of tonight's extravagant event was a regional foundation dedicated to the victims of road traffic accidents. My parents were leveraging the near-fatal tragedy they had ruthlessly orchestrated to launder their public image and manufacture an aura of pristine civic virtue. They sought to buy the goodwill of the city while actively financing a brutal international cartel and framing their own daughter for manslaughter. I did not pack my bags or flee the jurisdiction as Thomas had aggressively mandated. Instead, I spent the following hours preparing for a war of absolute visibility. The venue was the grand atrium of the city's most historic luxury hotel, a sprawling architectural masterpiece of gilded moldings, cascading crystal chandeliers, and polished marble floors. Outside, a relentless gauntlet of local media and society photographers lined the velvet ropes, capturing the arrival of the financial elite. When my hired black car pulled to a smooth halt at the curb, The flashing strobes of the paparazzi momentarily blinded the valet who opened my door. I stepped out onto the damp pavement, leaving the terrified, accommodating accountant completely behind. Tonight, I was the executioner. I wore a floor-length emerald silk gown that commanded immediate attention, paired with sharp minimalist diamond jewelry that caught the aggressive glare of the camera flashes. I exuded an aura of absolute, untouchable power. My posture was rigid, my expression a mask of cold, predatory anticipation. I did not duck my head or shy away from the lenses. I walked straight up the crimson carpet with the terrifying confidence of a woman who held the absolute destruction of every person inside that ballroom in the palm of her hand. The heavy oak doors parted and I crossed the threshold into the lavish ballroom. The sheer scale of the hypocrisy was physically suffocating. Towering floral arrangements of white lilies and orchids dominated the tables, while a classical string quartet played softly over the dull roar of wealthy patrons clinking champagne flutes. I navigated through the dense crowd of politicians, corporate stakeholders, and socialites. My sudden presence acted like a stone dropped into a calm pond. Conversations abruptly halted. Heads turned. The ambient noise of the gala died down as a wave of shocked whispers rippled through the assembled elite. They recognized me, the disgraced daughter allegedly on the verge of a criminal indictment, daring to crash the most prestigious social event of the season. I scanned the room until my eyes locked onto my targets. Thomas and Patricia stood near the central podium, surrounded by a circle of influential city council members. Patricia wore a custom silver gown, clutching a glass of sparkling water portraying the perfect concerned matriarch. Thomas stood beside her, projecting the image of a stoic philanthropic titan. When their eyes finally met mine, the blood drained instantly from their faces. The polished, aristocratic masks they wore for the public completely slipped, replaced by naked, unadulterated panic. Thomas recovered his composure with the speed of a seasoned predator. He leaned away from his guests, his jaw clenched in a tight, furious line, and snapped a sharp, unmistakable hand signal to the perimeter security detail. 4 massive men in tailored dark suits immediately detached themselves from the shadows of the arched doorways. They converged on my position with frightening synchronized speed, their hands hovering near their earpieces. Thomas intended to have me physically dragged out the service exit before I could utter a single word to the assembled media or his wealthy investors. He wanted to silence the threat and maintain his flawless narrative. The lead security guard stepped directly into my path, his massive frame blocking my view of the podium. He reached out with a heavy hand, fully intending to grip my arm and forcibly remove me from the venue. Before his fingers could even graze the silk fabric of my sleeve, a sharp, authoritative voice sliced through the rising tension of the ballroom. A man stepped smoothly out of the milling crowd, positioning himself solidly between me and the advancing security detail. Jamal looked incredibly sharp in a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo, radiating an intense, commanding presence that instantly halted the guards in their tracks. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his jacket and extracted his leather credentials wallet. With a swift, practiced motion, he flipped it open, thrusting the gleaming silver shield and his official identification card directly into the face of the lead guard. Jamal locked eyes with the towering man, his voice resonating with absolute legal authority, informing the detail that any attempt to touch me would result in an immediate charge of assaulting a federal witness. The lead guard hesitated, darting his eyes frantically toward Thomas for further instructions, terrified of violating federal protocol while surrounded by local media. Thomas was completely paralyzed, his champagne glass trembling visibly within his tightly gripped fingers. He recognized Jamal from previous hostile courtroom encounters and understood the catastrophic implications of his sudden appearance. Jamal did not offer them a single opportunity to recover or strategize. He smoothly offered me his right arm, treating me with the utmost respect, befitting the most honored guest of the entire evening. I placed my hand upon his tailored sleeve, keeping my posture perfectly upright. Together we completely bypassed the neutralized security detail, walking with deliberate, synchronized steps directly toward my parents. The trapped, terrified expressions on their faces confirmed their total defeat. The reckoning had finally begun, and they had absolutely nowhere to hide tonight. The crowd parted for us like a startled tide, their shot creating a wide path directly through the heart of my father's meticulously curated charity gala. I leaned slightly into Jamal's arm, projecting the image of a perfectly untroubled socialite, attending just another tedious family function. We moved with a terrifying, unhurried grace. Aunt Jillian, dripping in stolen cartel diamonds, was the first relative to intercept us. She attempted a strained smile, her eyes darting nervously toward Jamal's federal badge, which was still partially visible inside his tuxedo jacket. She offered a trembling compliment on my emerald silk gown, her voice brittle and laced with panic. I smiled back, offering a lethal, practiced expression that did not reach my eyes. I complimented her heavy diamond necklace in return, casually noting how unfortunate it would be if federal asset forfeiture laws required her to surrender the piece by Monday morning. The color drained entirely from her face, and she stumbled backward, her expensive champagne splashing onto the polished marble floor. Jamal and I continued our measured glide through the ballroom, engaging in brief surgical interactions. I greeted Uncle Marcus, the family accountant, who eagerly signed off on the fraudulent corporate tax returns, complimenting his recent golf scores, while softly inquiring if his federal prison cell would have a scenic view of the green. We left a distinct trail of hyperventilating relatives in our wake, systematically dismantling their comfortable, insulated realities with polite, whispered threats. We drifted smoothly toward the towering ice sculpture dominating the center of the room. Standing beside the centerpiece were the two people who believed they had engineered my permanent incarceration. Brittany wore a crimson designer gown, clinging possessively to Liam's arm. They were laughing at a joke made by a city councilman playing the powerful corporate couple. Then Liam turned his head. His laughter died instantly, choking off into a strangled gasp. He recoiled, his hand dropping from Brittany's waist as if struck by lightning. Brittany followed his terrified gaze, her manicured features twisting into a mask of pure terror. She looked from my face to Jamal, realizing in one devastating instant that the federal prosecutor she feared was not investigating me, but protecting me. I stopped 2 feet in front of them, savoring their total suffocating paralysis. I tilted my head, offering a chilling smile. I addressed Liam first, complimenting his tuxedo while casually mentioning that the digital file transfer he completed at 2 in the morning was currently undergoing forensic analysis at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His jaw clenched tightly, a bead of sweat tracing a slow path down his temple. I shifted my unwavering gaze to my younger sister. I loudly admired her crimson dress, noting with a pleasant tone how it matched the exact color of the blood she had left on the front bumper of Liam's ruined sedan. Brittany swayed dangerously on her expensive heels, her hands flying upward to stifle a broken sob. She looked desperately toward Liam for protection, but the corporate fixer was completely frozen, recognizing the inescapable checkmate. We did not linger to watch their complete psychological collapse. We had a final, more important stop to make before the main event commenced. My mother stood rigidly near the stage stairs, furiously whispering instructions to her panicked event coordinator. The carefully constructed image of the benevolent philanthropist was rapidly fracturing under the intense pressure of our sudden, unauthorized arrival. I approached her with Jamal remaining a respectful half-pace behind, projecting a silent threat. Patricia snapped her attention to me, her eyes blazing with maternal fury and desperate fear. She hissed an angry command demanding I leave immediately before I caused a public scandal. I did not flinch, maintaining my serene composure. I reached out and gently adjusted a stray silver sequin on her custom gown, treating her with the condescending affection of a parent scolding a petulant child. I spoke in a voice meant only for her ears, soft and incredibly cold. I praised her exquisite taste in floral arrangements, observing how much effort she put into curating a fake world. Then, I casually informed her that federal agents were currently staging quietly outside the hotel perimeter, preparing to execute a synchronized raid on every single bank account, offshore trust, and physical property tied to the Wilson name. I watched the profound, devastating realization dawn in her wide eyes. I told her to enjoy the remaining minutes of her perfect life because the grand illusion was about to shatter, permanently taking her beloved country club memberships and high society status down into the dirt. Patricia opened her mouth to argue, to deny, to threaten, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She simply stared at me, a hollow shell, watching her entire universe evaporate. A sharp chime echoed through the grand ballroom, signaling the commencement of the formal program. The string quartet concluded their symphony, and the ambient chatter slowly died down to a heavy, expectant hush. My father, clinging desperately to his legendary arrogance, blatantly refused to accept his imminent defeat. He genuinely believed his vast power could somehow bend reality to his iron will. He straightened his expensive tuxedo jacket, projecting his broad chest outward, and marched aggressively up the carpeted stairs to the elevated central stage. He stepped up to the polished acrylic podium, adjusting the microphone with a practiced, steady hand. He looked over the sea of wealthy donors, completely ignoring the fact that his criminal empire was actively crumbling around him. He cleared his throat, a resonant sound that commanded absolute obedience. Thomas began his keynote speech, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system, welcoming the distinguished guests to an evening of charity and goodwill. He spoke eloquently about the tragic victims of road traffic accidents, utilizing the exact tragedy he ruthlessly orchestrated to extract applause from the community he was actively betraying. He raised his hands, demanding their attention, unaware that his final performance had just begun. Thomas projected his voice across the glittering ballroom, his tone dripping with practiced velvety sincerity. He gestured expansively with his hands, weaving a captivating narrative about the enduring strength of family values and the profound moral duty the wealthy owed to the vulnerable. The assembled elite clung to his every syllable, completely mesmerized by the sheer magnetism of his fraudulent philanthropy. He spoke passionately of his deep, unwavering commitment to the community, claiming that true leadership required personal sacrifice and unyielding ethical standards. While he commanded the room with absolute attention, I initiated the next phase of my strategy. I slipped away from the side of Jamal, moving silently along the perimeter of the grand atrium. The heavy velvet curtains draped along the walls provided perfect cover as I navigated toward the elevated audiovisual control booth situated at the rear of the balcony. Jamal subtly shifted his position on the main floor, perfectly blocking the line of sight of Patricia and the remaining security guards. He ensured no one tracked my deliberate ascent up the spiral brass staircase leading directly to the technical deck. The control booth was a dimly lit sanctuary overlooking the sprawling sea of evening gowns and tailored tuxedos. A single technician sat hunched over a massive digital mixing console, his face illuminated by the harsh blue glow of multiple monitors. He wore heavy soundproof headphones, completely engrossed in balancing the audio levels of my father booming out his speech. I approached him from behind my footsteps, completely silent on the thick carpet. I tapped his shoulder firmly. He jumped, yanking the headphones down around his neck, his eyes wide with sudden alarm. Before he could utter a single word of protest, I produced a crisp, forged work order bearing the exact letterhead of the corporate holdings company. I spoke with absolute icy authority, informing him that the keynote presentation required an immediate, highly classified visual update, authorized directly by Thomas himself. The young technician hesitated, his gaze darting nervously between my commanding emerald gown and the intimidating corporate document. The sheer arrogance of my demand, combined with my undeniable status as the executive daughter, paralyzed his critical thinking. He nodded frantically, stepping aside to grant me unrestricted access to the master visual terminal. I stepped up to the complex console, my eyes rapidly scanning the array of input ports and digital routing switches. I reached into the concealed pocket of my silk gown and extracted a sleek titanium flash drive. This was not the fake decoy I had allowed Liam to steal from my home office. This drive contained the genuine unredacted audit trails I had painstakingly compiled over 6 agonizing months. It held every wire transfer, every offshore routing number, and every damning communication proving my family was actively laundering massive sums of illicit cash for a brutal international syndicate. I firmly inserted the titanium drive into the primary USB port of the master console. The system instantly recognized the external device. A prompt flashed across the monitor requesting permission to override the current visual feed. I kept my eyes locked on the stage below. Thomas was reaching the emotional climax of his keynote address, placing his right hand over his heart, grandly declaring that the Wilson family legacy would always stand as a shining beacon of truth, transparency, and unwavering justice. I smiled, my finger hovering directly over the enter key. I pressed down with absolute finality, executing the digital override. The massive LED screens towering directly behind Thomas suddenly flickered. The serene, beautifully branded charity logo shattered into a chaotic storm of sharp digital static. A loud, discordant electronic screech echoed through the ballroom speakers, causing several wealthy patrons in the front row to visibly flinch and cover their ears. Thomas paused right in the middle of his sentence, a look of profound irritation crossing his aristocratic features. He tapped his microphone twice blindly, assuming a simple technical malfunction was interrupting his glorious moment. He offered the audience a tight practice smile, attempting to smooth over the awkward disruption, with a casual, charming joke about the unreliability of modern technology. The crowd offered a polite, scattered chuckle, their eyes remaining fixed on the stage. Then the digital static abruptly cleared. The screens did not return to the charity logo. Instead, they illuminated the entire ballroom with blinding, undeniable truth. A highly detailed, comprehensive financial spreadsheet materialized across the massive displays in razor-sharp resolution. The document was a master ledger of the Wilson corporate empire, but it displayed the hidden, illicit accounting columns my father had desperately tried to bury. The screen showcased a series of massive sequential wire transfers originating from a notorious cartel shell company based in the Cayman Islands. The illicit funds were clearly routed directly into the primary operational accounts of my father and his legitimate manufacturing firm. Beside the damning financial figures, a separate window opened, displaying the corresponding internal emails. The messages were explicitly authored by Thomas and Liam, openly discussing the precise percentages they were keeping as their laundering fee and outlining their exact strategies for bribing municipal officials to look the other way. The evidence was presented with absolute clarity, highlighting the undeniable dates, the specific routing numbers, and the digital signatures of the men responsible. A collective synchronized gasp ripped through the grand atrium. The polite, hushed atmosphere of the high society gala instantly transformed into a chaotic frenzy of shocked murmurs and outright panic. Wealthy investors, influential politicians, and prominent socialites stared upward in sheer, unadulterated horror. The undeniable proof of a massive criminal conspiracy was being broadcast directly into their faces, explicitly linking the man standing on the stage to a violent international criminal syndicate. Cell phones were immediately drawn from pockets and crystal clutches. Dozens of camera lenses pointed directly at the towering screens, frantically recording the irrefutable evidence of the resulting total moral and financial bankruptcy. Thomas slowly turned around, his face draining of all color and transforming into terror. He stared up at the massive, towering monitors, the undeniable, damning proof of his international cartel laundering operation, washing his pale, aristocratic features in a harsh, unforgiving digital glow. Before he could even attempt to formulate a desperate face-saving lie for the audience, the complex spreadsheets vanished completely. The central screen abruptly cut to a crisp, high-definition video feed. It was Liam sitting nervously in my private home office, just hours earlier, totally unaware he was being recorded by a tiny hidden camera I had meticulously planted inside a decorative bookshelf. The crisp audio boomed heavily through the gala's premium sound system, perfectly capturing every terrified, groveling syllable of the corporate fixer's ultimate unpardonable betrayal. Liam's frantic, trembling, recorded voice echoed sharply across the completely frozen, breathless crowd of wealthy high society donors. On the giant central screen, he completely unraveled, sweating profusely, while frantically detailing his long-standing, highly illicit affair with my younger sister. He vividly described their luxurious stolen weekends, secretly funded entirely by embezzled corporate capital stolen directly from Thomas. But the final truly devastating blow landed when the recorded Liam began outlining their dark masterpiece of violent deceit. He explicitly detailed exactly how he and Brittany had meticulously orchestrated the brutal hit-and-run, explaining the precise technical steps they took to wipe the digital footprint of the luxury vehicle and deliberately frame me for vehicular manslaughter. He tearfully confessed to planting the car keys in my apartment and drafting the completely falsified police tip-off. The entire lavish ballroom stood completely paralyzed, trapped tightly together inside a collective, inescapable waking nightmare. I calmly watched Liam in real life, standing near the rapidly melting ice sculpture, physically shrinking inward as his own recorded voice publicly broadcast his absolute moral rot to the entire city. The video feed abruptly dissolved into pure blackness, instantly replaced by an official, highly classified federal laboratory report. The digital document was visually unmistakable to everyone present. It featured a stark, magnified image of the crashed BMW's steering wheel alongside a highly complex genetic sequencing chart. Bold, aggressive red text flashed repeatedly across the bottom of the screen, confirming a flawless, undeniable forensic match. The distinct DNA extracted directly from the driver's side airbag deployed during the violent collision belonged unequivocally to Brittany. The fragile, suffocating silence holding the massive room together violently shattered into a million jagged pieces. Absolute, unbridled panic immediately consumed the grand atrium. Wealthy investors shoved aggressively past one another, frantically abandoning their half-empty crystal champagne flutes on pristine white linen tables, absolutely desperate to physically flee the deadly blast radius of the Wilson family's catastrophic public ruin. Terrified city council members shouted frantically into their expensive cell phones, desperately summoning their crisis management teams to immediately distance their political campaigns from my father's newly exposed, utterly toxic empire. The classical string quartet had long since fled the elevated stage, leaving only the deafening, chaotic roar of a corrupt dynasty violently collapsing in real time. A piercing, incredibly hysterical scream sliced sharply through the rising, deafening pandemonium. Patricia stood completely unmoored by the wooden podium, her trembling hands brutally clutching the silken sides of her silver designer gown. She shrieked again, emitting a raw, primal sound of total social annihilation, forced to helplessly watch her carefully curated aristocratic life burn completely to ash before her very eyes. The perfect matriarch mask instantly dissolved into a grotesque portrait of naked despair. She stumbled blindly forward, her expensive heels catching awkwardly on the carpeted stairs, frantically screaming for Thomas to somehow fix the unfixable disaster. But my father remained permanently anchored to the stage, a hollow, defeated statue staring blankly into the flashing strobe lights of the relentless paparazzi who had forcefully breached the velvet ropes and flooded the sprawling ballroom floor. Brittany shattered completely. The historically arrogant, previously untouchable golden child broke instantly into violent, ugly sobs. Her vibrant crimson dress felt like a glaring target as the horrified gazes of her former peers locked directly onto her trembling frame. She spun wildly, utterly realizing that her parents could no longer shield her from the severe federal consequences of her lethal recklessness. Blinded by sheer panic and desperate for salvation, she lunged across the chaotic ballroom floor. She violently tore through the fleeing crowds, physically shoving aside bewildered guests, until she reached the one man she foolishly believed still harbored an ounce of genuine affection for her. She threw herself toward Jamal, her hands reaching out to grasp the lapels of his midnight blue tuxedo. Tears streamed down her ruined, tear-stained face, smearing her expensive makeup into dark, chaotic streaks. She wept openly, begging him for mercy, pleading for his protection, and frantically promising that she could explain everything if he would just use his federal authority to make the screens turn off. She cried that she loved him, playing the role of the tragic, misunderstood victim for one final time. Jamal did not offer her a single ounce of comfort. He stood perfectly rigid, an immovable pillar of absolute justice. He looked down at the woman who had effortlessly discarded his ring and actively conspired to send his client to federal prison. His expression was not angry, but filled with a cold, absolute disgust that cut deeper than any shouted insult. He refused to speak a single word to her. He simply raised his hands, refusing to let her touch him, and took a deliberate, measured step backward, completely removing himself from her orbit. Brittany stumbled into the empty space he left behind, falling to her knees on the polished marble floor. Her wails echoed. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom burst open with a deafening crash. Dozens of uniformed federal officers flooded the venue, their boots slamming against the marble with terrifying synchronization. They moved with absolute surgical precision, cutting through the guests to secure the perimeter and lock down all available exits. The reckoning I had meticulously engineered had finally arrived, wearing ballistic vests and carrying steel cuffs. The lead federal agent stepped to the forefront, his commanding voice cutting sharply through the remaining chaos like a cracking whip. He read Thomas his rights, listing a devastating litany of federal charges, including racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Thomas did not utter a single word of protest. The arrogant titan of industry was completely broken, his broad shoulders sagging as cold steel cuffs were locked tightly around his wrists. Patricia reacted differently. She lashed out, screaming at the arresting officers, desperately threatening to sue the entire federal government while wildly waving her diamond-clad wrists. A tactical female agent swiftly subdued her, spinning the hysterical matriarch around and securing her hands behind her back. The shimmering silver designer gown she wore suddenly looked like a cheap, tragic costume. Brittany remained kneeling on the cold marble floor, completely catatonic. Two officers gently but firmly hauled her to her feet, reciting her rights regarding the vehicular manslaughter and evidence tampering charges. She offered zero resistance, her eyes vacant and unseeing, the golden child narrative permanently erased. Liam, however, refused to surrender gracefully. Recognizing the absolute certainty of decades in a federal penitentiary, the corporate fixer made a desperate, spectacularly foolish bid for freedom. He violently shoved a bewildered waiter aside, grabbed a heavy silver tray, and hurled it at the closest advancing agent. The distraction bought him a split second. He bolted toward the service corridor, his polished dress shoes slipping wildly on the spilled champagne. He did not make it past the ice sculpture. 3 federal tactical officers intercepted his path, converging on him with terrifying speed. They tackled Liam simultaneously, slamming his impeccably dressed form hard into the polished marble floor. The impact echoed sharply across the room. He thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities until a knee was planted firmly between his shoulder blades, pinning him down, while heavy cuffs secured his wrists. The media circus waiting outside the hotel had multiplied exponentially. When the grand oak doors finally opened, a blinding barrage of camera flashes illuminated the damp night air. Jamal and I walked out first, stepping clear of the entrance to watch the procession. We stood on the curb, the cool breeze washing over us. The police escorted Thomas out first, his head bowed, thoroughly humiliated before the very reporters he had spent decades manipulating. Patricia followed, her mascara running in dark tracks down her pale cheeks, loudly sobbing as cameras captured every agonizing second of her ruin. Brittany was next, looking small and incredibly fragile, flanked by stern federal agents. Finally, Liam was dragged out, sporting a rapidly swelling bruise on his cheekbone, his designer tuxedo torn and ruined. They were shoved unceremoniously into the back of armored federal transport vehicles. The doors slammed shut with a heavy metallic finality, permanently sealing their fates. The sirens wailed, carrying the toxic remnants of the Wilson family away into the dark. 1 year later, the sprawling city skyline looked remarkably different from the expansive glass windows of my new corner office. The heavy, oppressive shadows cast by my father's corrupt empire had completely lifted, replaced by an atmosphere of genuine transparency and hard-won justice. The federal seizure of the Wilson corporate assets had yielded unprecedented results. Millions of dollars in laundered cartel funds were intercepted and legally redirected. I made absolutely certain that a significant portion of that recovered wealth was channeled directly into an irrevocable medical trust. That trust fully funded the comprehensive rehabilitation of the innocent pedestrian Brittany had struck on that fateful rainy night. The young man had completely recovered from his severe injuries utilizing the state-of-the-art physical therapy facilities paid for entirely by the seized assets. My former family remained exactly where they belonged. Thomas was currently serving a 30-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary, his vast wealth and political connections completely useless behind concrete walls. Patricia was housed in a minimum security facility, serving 10 years for her active complicity and financial fraud, her aristocratic delusions replaced by an orange jumpsuit. Brittany and Liam received 20 years each their respective roles in the hit-and-run and subsequent cover-up, resulting in ironclad convictions. The sprawling suburban mansion, the luxury vehicles, the offshore accounts, everything they had violently protected was gone, auctioned off, or absorbed by the state. I turned away from the panoramic window, taking a deep, satisfying breath of clean, unburdened air. The sleek, minimalist space around me belonged entirely to the newly established firm of Wilson and Carter, a boutique forensic legal agency specializing in dismantling high-level corporate fraud. Jamal sat casually across the room, resting on the edge of a polished mahogany conference table. He wore a crisp white shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, reviewing a dense financial dossier. We had co-founded the firm 6 months ago, merging my intricate knowledge of corporate accounting loopholes with his ruthless prosecutorial expertise. We were incredibly successful, highly sought after, and completely liberated from the toxic constraints of our pasts. Jamal looked up from the document, a warm, genuine smile spreading across his face. He set the file down and reached for 2 steaming mugs of dark roast coffee resting on the table. He stood and walked over to my desk, handing me a mug. The ceramic was comfortably warm against my palms. He leaned against the edge of my desk, looking out at the city we had helped cleanse. We did not need to exchange a single word to acknowledge the profound peace we had achieved. The relentless storm that had threatened to drown me had passed, leaving behind a clear, boundless horizon. We clinked our coffee mugs together, the soft chime ringing with absolute clarity. I took a slow sip, savoring the rich, bitter flavor. I was no longer the scapegoat, no longer the terrified daughter fighting for survival against her own blood. I was Emma, an architect of my own destiny, thriving beautifully in the brilliant light of absolute freedom. The central lesson of Emma's journey is that true freedom requires dismantling the toxic structures we were born into. Family is often viewed as a sanctuary, but when it becomes a source of betrayal and corruption, survival demands severing those ties. Emma's victory wasn't merely about putting her abusers behind bars. It was about reclaiming her narrative and establishing a legacy built on integrity rather than deceit. By facing her deepest fears, she transformed profound betrayal into a foundation for authentic success and justice. Take total control of your own destiny today, share your empowering thoughts, and please comment below.